so much depends on getting this right. Because if there are 4 more years of this president, we will not recognize our United States of America. We must win. Now, we already know Donald Trump and his allies will do anything they can to hold on to power, but their playbook is not going to work on me.
We all know climate change is an existential threat to us all. The first thing I'll do as president is rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, which I helped put together. Bring almost 200 nations to Washington, D.C. to make them keep their commitment to, in fact, up the ante on climate change. And get to net zero emissions by 2050. And by 2035, make sure that 50% of that is already done. Ladies and gentlemen, beating Donald Trump's not going to be easy. The first thing the next president is going to have to deal with is inheriting a divided nation, a world in disarray. You know, we need a leader who on day one has the proven ability to unite this country, to bring people together. That's what I've done my whole career.
Existential threat after existential threat from the Democrats. Isn't it astonishing? Climate change is an existential threat. Trump is an existential threat. Basically, vote for Democrats or we're all going to die is the DNC's mantra. Vote for Democrats or the world is going to end. Not an exaggeration. This is not hyperbole. This is what they are offering you. Unless you vote against Trump, everybody's going to die. I don't find that unifying. Call me strange. I don't find that compelling. I don't find it honest or helpful. I find it insane. But here I am. I'm the crazy one. I'm in New York City. I think 90% of Manhattan, the island I'm currently on, voted for Hillary Clinton in the last election. I guess 9 out of 10 people here think that I'm the crazy one. What does that say? Climate change is an existential threat. We will not recognize the United States, Mayor Pete says. He's an existential threat, too. This country will no longer be America if President Trump wins. Maybe they should just calm down. Maybe it's time for the Democrats to just take a step back, take a deep breath, and try not to be so utterly crazy. But that brings me to what I start to think is a real threat to this country, at least a threat to the unity of this country, to our future as a political entity where we can solve disputes through the process about what should be happening in this country, about what government is doing and what rights people have, to solve it through good faith and understand that ultimately, even if we don't get everything we want, this country is the richest, freest, most prosperous political entity ever to have existed in the history of the world, and therefore we can handle some disputes, including disputes that don't end up going our way. If that changes, then it's not clear to me that we will be able to recognize our country all that much longer. But this scorched earth politics, what exactly the Attorney General Barr was talking about over the weekend, the ends justify the means, stop at nothing. You want to do good, and therefore the people who oppose what you're trying to do must be bad. That mentality has completely overtaken the left and the Democratic Party and the socialists therein, and it's getting more and more troubling. They no longer are happy even to have legal victories or cultural victories. They expect legal victory in the culture war. They expect cultural victory in the same. And then they want to go around and force people to bend the knee. And if they won't do that, then they plan to just throw them on the ground and bayonet the survivors, so to speak. That's where we are now, my friends. That's what we face from the opposition. And yet another example of this is Chick-fil-A. Now, I am, because of my genetic issue with celiac disease, not somebody who can speak very well about how good Chick-fil-A is, because I can basically eat nothing. I can have their waffle fries, which are just okay. I'm just going to say it. As French fries go, they're just... Producer Mark, you like the waffle fries? That's the only thing...
Of course I do. I like everything about Chick-fil-A.
I mean, people tell me that the chicken sandwiches are like
Amazing.
They're like addictive, and
The spicy chicken sandwich is to die for.
I can't touch any of it basically. Like
They have grilled chicken nuggets now.
I've had that's what I do when I'm stuck at an airport,
Yeah.
and I have supported Chick-fil-A because I like their customer service. I like the way that they treat their employees, that they close on Sunday. They do all these things, that they're a Christian values company. The third largest fast food company in the United States. I was unaware of that, by the way. After McDonald's, and I believe Starbucks is number 2 now in terms of
if you count Starbucks as fast food, yeah.
Yeah. But the chicken nuggets, the grilled chicken, look, no one really wants grilled chicken nuggets. It's like diet food, right? So I understand that that's not a fair way for me to judge. The chicken nuggets are okay. But Chick-fil-A is obviously a very, very successful business model, but it has come under a lot of scrutiny in recent years because it is a traditional Christian values company. And as a traditional Christian values company, there is some conflict with the LGBTQ community, with the woke left, with the social justice warriors. There are problems that they have with this. And so here is what Chick-fil-A decided to do after years of being a staunch supporter, not just of Christian values, but also Christian charities. Chick-fil-A is cutting off donations to the Salvation Army. They're getting rid of donations to the Salvation Army and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes because of their stands on same-sex marriage. So because those organizations, and remember, those organizations do not discriminate against anyone. They provide services, relief, assistance, help, food, shelter, advice, everything to people, irrespective of religious belief, of gender, ethnicity, you name anything, right? They do not discriminate. It's a sexual orientation. But the organization does support, and it's, I believe the Salvation Army's officers, so to speak, are I think they're ministers or deacons. I mean, I believe that's a standard for them. And they espouse traditional marriage beliefs. The charity is now getting money cut off to it. The Salvation Army, which I think, well, I'll get into their statement that they have put out as a result. But, these are people that are always, ringing the bell, and they want the money on the street, and Christmas time, they're raising all this money. They do a lot of good for a lot of people. GLAAD, which is it is the gay and lesbian, I forget what the rest of but GLAAD is an LGBTQ advocacy organization, a very powerful one, very well funded, a lot of sway in media world and in corporate America in general. GLAAD, in response to what Chick-fil-A did here, and keep in mind there was also a controversy recently with Ellie Goulding, who I don't even know I know she's a singer. I don't even know what her songs are, but, I'm out of the loop these days. She wouldn't perform at the halftime ceremony of I think it was an NFL game on Thanksgiving, because it was raising money, I think, for the Salvation Army, if memory serves. And so she wanted them to make a statement of support or to make a donation to a pro-LGBTQ charity. I mean, it's just tough to keep up with all this stuff. Anyway, so there's been a bit of controversy right now generated by the left, by these different social justice warriors and people trying to outdo one another on their wokeness. A bit of controversy with regard to the Salvation Army. Remember, an organization that just helps people. A charity that just helps people. They're going after that. And GLAAD, the LGBT advocacy organization, responded officially to Chick-fil-A bending the knee to the LGBT community by cutting off the Salvation Army, because the Salvation Army is for traditional marriage as a policy matter. GLAAD responded in this way, quote, in addition to refraining from financially supporting anti-LGBTQ organizations, Chick-fil-A still lacks policies to ensure safe workplaces for LGBTQ employees and should unequivocally speak out against the anti-LGBTQ reputation that their brand represents. See, this is the problem with bending the knee to wokeness. They do not take it as a gesture of good faith. They do not take it as conciliation. They see it as weakness, and then they expect more. Now you've conceded that you're a bigot, so you better listen to everything they say going forward, or else they're going to keep calling you a bigot, which you've already admitted to by changing your behavior based on what they say you should do. Have the executives at Chick-fil-A who came up with this decision to cut off the Salvation Army of all things, have they learned nothing have they seen nothing in recent years? Let's be very clear about this. The LGBT activist community, there are LGBTQ people I know who are very active Christians, and they have a different view of this matter. Many of them do, I should say. But the LGBT community of activist groups and the tremendous influence they have in culture and media and in corporate America now, they do not accept, they will not accept any organization that still advocates for traditional marriage. They expect those organizations to be attacked and destroyed, including, and it's just a matter of time before this becomes even more overt, religious organizations. One of the problems that they will run into, however, with this is that when they try to get the Catholic Church to abandon its traditional marriage stance and other Christian denominations, although these days there's so many Christian denominations, and some of them, I look at it and I mean, seriously, it looks like some kind of a youth rock concert where everyone's just having a great time and no one's actually talking about morality or ethics or Jesus or the gospel. But that's another conversation for another day. I mean, if you want to go to a rock concert, just go to a rock concert. I don't know. I mean, that's how but then again, I grew up Catholic, so we have a lot of, incense and, singing and other things. But what you see happening here is the move toward ostracizing and eventually actively condemning any traditional marriage advocacy anywhere as the equivalent of being a racist, for example. That it's no longer going to be, those are your religious beliefs. You believe that this is a covenant between a man and woman and God, and so as long as that's not official state policy, you can still no, if you even speak that aloud, you will be punished. The state will be brought down on your head. The culture will be brought down on your head. The media will come after you. Even if you are a charity that has saved millions of people from deprivation, despair, and perhaps even worse during their darkest times. Here is how the Salvation Army responded to this move by Chick-fil-A to drop them as a partner, a corporate partner that sponsors some of what they do. Quote, we're saddened to learn that a corporate partner has felt it necessary to divert funding to other hunger education and homelessness organizations, areas in which the Salvation Army, as the largest social services provider in the world, is already fully committed. The Salvation Army said in a statement, quote, we serve more than 23 million individuals a year, including those in the LGBTQ plus community. In fact, we believe we are the largest provider of poverty relief to the LGBTQ population. They are helping 23 million people a year. But because the organization and its leadership and its Christian roots still adhere to a policy preference, really a religious and ethical preference for marriage as it was traditionally known until the Obergefell decision, the Supreme Court in this country, between a man and a woman. That charity, all the good stuff they do doesn't really matter. They have to not just be punished, but this organization now needs to be humiliated. It needs to be treated like it's a pariah organization. We are not going to last very long as a country going forward if we have to know the politics of every restaurant owner when we go into a restaurant. If we have to know, I had a friend recently tell me that she knows people. She's obviously conservative, so she's cool. But she knows people who won't go to Soul Cycle, which is one of these bicycle cycling classes. Won't go to Soul Cycle anymore because the owner has supported Trump. I mean, if this is the way that this society is going to go, if we're going to accept the politicization of everything, extend no grace, no forgiveness, and no sense of kindness and decency to each other, irrespective of political differences, we are heading for very dark and dangerous times as a country. Forget about climate change. That's bull. It's a distraction. It's nonsense. It's not going to do anything to you. I promise you. I mean, I know you already know this, but I promise you. In 10 years, they'll still be saying, well, we were wrong about 10 years ago, but now it's really going to be bad. I mean, this is just, there's a part of people's brains that like to think about how it's all going to end and the terribleness. And it excites the brain to think about the end. And then it excites the socialists to think that they can take over all aspects of the economy and day-to-day life based upon this hyperventilating fairy tale they tell each other about how the world is going to end unless we stop using certain light bulbs and take shorter showers. This is absurd. But this is a bad day when an organization that is as successful as Chick-fil-A bends the knee, and when a group that you would think should at least get some extension of faith, of good faith, and people treat it with a little bit of just respect for the good that it does, is being trashed because they have a different view of marriage. This is not going to end well unless we start to turn the situation around. Team, I hope you're enjoying listening to the show here. As you know, the podcast goes up every day by 3 o'clock Eastern of the Buck Sexton Show. You can listen on iTunes. You can listen to it on the iHeartRadio app. Please subscribe on iTunes if you can, if you have not already. Also, remember, Pluto TV. You can see what's going on here in the Freedom Hut. You can watch it on your smartphone. Download the Pluto TV app. Channel 248, The First. Buck Sexton and Jesse Kelly holding it down Monday through Friday. Channel 248, Pluto TV. All right, team, there's a lot going on right now in Hong Kong. We haven't updated you on the story in a while. It is getting particularly violent. The standoff is getting worse. We want to bring in our friend Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China. You see him all the time on Fox News. Also hear him on the John Batchelor Show. Gordon, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us what is going on right now in Hong Kong.
Yeah, at this moment, there are two things of importance. One of them is that there was a standoff at Hong Kong Polytechnic University where there were about 600 or so protesters in the university buildings, and they were completely surrounded by police. So it was a siege. About 80 or so escaped. There's maybe 100 left. The others surrendered. Those who were 18 or above were arrested. Those below 18, they were merely photographed, their Hong Kong identity card numbers taken, and they were let go, at least for the moment. The other development is extremely troubling, and I think it's because Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, believes he has the advantage because the siege at Hong Kong Polytechnic is winding down. And that is, there was an attack on Albert Ho, a leading pro-democracy figure. There was an attempt to burn down the premises of the Epoch Times, a newspaper. And it seems like we are starting to see thug rule in Hong Kong. And this was related, of course, to China, because China, for the most part, controls the political activities of thugs in the territory.
Now, what do you think the response from the Chinese government is going to be in the days ahead? It feels like there's been an escalation of the violence. I feel, if I remember a few days ago, there was video of a policeman in Hong Kong shooting a protester at effectively point blank range in the chest. So there's been real violence. Do you think that what prevents Xi Jinping from just saying, do what you got to do, lock it down, and start really essentially go the Tiananmen Square route?
Well, I think that the police have pretty much orders to do whatever they want, which is the reason why 8 days ago in that incident you mentioned, a Hong Kong traffic cop pulled a revolver on a protester who was obviously unarmed, shot him in the torso. And this was in an open place where the officer could have retreated. There was no threat at all to his life, no threat at all to property damage, nothing. And so we have seen a much more aggressive attitude on the part of the police. And indeed, in this Hong Kong Polytechnic standoff, some of the tactics of the police have really been horrific. There's this video going around showing a protester lying completely prone on the ground, Hong Kong policemen stomping on his head. Also, people who were trying to surrender from Hong Kong Polytechnic were met with rubber bullets and with tear gas. So I think the police essentially can do what they want. Now, I think what prevents China from formally deploying the People's Armed Police or the People's Liberation Army is that they know that the protesters will fight them and that not only the protesters will take casualties, but so will China's forces. And the casualties will be high on both sides. I think that's the deterrent right now with Xi Jinping.
Is there any real effort to negotiate between the two sides? Who's in charge of that? You know, whatever happened to Carrie Lam, and how are those processes playing out, if they're playing out at all?
Yeah, dialogue between the two sides is completely broken down. First of all, it is difficult to negotiate with protesters because there's so many different types of protesters right now. Nobody speaks for the movement. Nobody wants to speak for the movement. On the other side, Carrie Lam speaks for nobody but Xi Jinping. She is not making decisions. China has completely taken over the Hong Kong government, as it's taken over the Hong Kong police force. So talking to her is not really productive. And also, Xi Jinping doesn't want to talk. He wants to settle this with harsh measures, as we have seen over the last several months.
Now, what do you think that the outcome here is going to be, Gordon? I mean, how does this – it feels like it's gone on for so many months at this point. Where does this head and how does it end?
Yeah. Well, first of all, protests have gone on since April, and they've been going on continuously since June. So we're now in our 6th month. I don't know where this ends, of course, but there's several outcomes, some of which I think most people don't expect. One of them is that the protesters just outlast China because China itself is fragile. And I think that Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, is certainly going to be held to account for these hardline policies that have triggered the unrest. So there are any number of things that could happen, but one of them is, and I think the most likely is, just continued standoff in Hong Kong. And every time that the protests look like they're going to peter out, I'm sure Beijing is going to do something to enrage people, just as it did a couple days ago by declaring that the Hong Kong courts have no jurisdiction to interpret the basic law, which is Hong Kong's mini constitution, as they call it.
Is there a possible off-ramp you could see for Xi Jinping to de-escalate the situation without losing a lot of face? Is there something feasible? Or if he were to say, okay, we're going to reevaluate this and essentially call off the dogs, that, you know, it would just look like he's weak and there could be real ramifications. I mean, is there an off-ramp?
You know, there probably is an off-ramp. I don't think it'll be taken, but we do know that some of the senior officials in the Hong Kong government privately do not like what's going on. And sometimes they murmur things in public. So it's possible, not likely, but it's possible that you could see senior Hong Kong government officials try to reach out to the various parts of the protest movement. For a number of reasons, I don't think that they will, and I don't think the protesters will talk to them at this point. So no likely off-ramps. in the immediate future.
To the degree that we can tell, and we're speaking to Gordon Chang, everybody, author of The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, to the degree that we can tell, or that you can tell, what is sentiment in mainland China among just the general Chinese population about what's going on in Hong Kong? Are there pockets of support for this that could turn into something beyond just what we see in Hong Kong? Essentially, is this going to maybe get a little bit of a wind in the sails of some of the pro-freedom folks inside of China, or is that just a fantasy at this point?
That's a great question, Buck. I think there are pockets of support for the Hong Kong protesters inside mainland China, mostly in Guangdong province, which surrounds Hong Kong. But also, I think that people in China, by and large, do not sympathize with people from Hong Kong. Never have, probably won't in our lifetimes. But that's not to say that protests can't spread into the mainland, because people in China have got their own grievances, especially related to the economy, which is in serious trouble, Buck. So it's not growing at the 6.0% pace that they claim for the third quarter. It's more like 1%, maybe even negative. And that is causing and will cause a lot of loss to people who are not accustomed to losing money. So as Arthur Waldron of the University of Pennsylvania points out, Chinese regimes unravel from the outside in. Hong Kong is on the periphery of China, and you could see the same dynamic occur as we've seen in the past throughout China's imperial period.
So Hong Kong could be a tipping point that has real ramifications for the regime. How would that play out?
Well, I think it would play out this way, and that is I would like to think, and here I'm hoping probably more than assessing, but I would hope to think that Americans would see that they have common cause with the protesters in Hong Kong, because the same power that is encroaching on their autonomy, China, is also attacking our democracy. And I don't think the American political establishment is there yet, but you're starting to see many voices, especially in the Senate, and even some in the House, that are starting to think that we need to be much more supportive of people in Hong Kong. There is the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act of 2019. It passed the House. It probably will pass the Senate, both with veto-proof majorities. And that could be the start of a more robust response to China. But I think that we need to stand with the kids in Hong Kong, largely because that's our fight.
What do you think the Trump administration should do, and how would you assess how Trump has handled this so far?
Well, I think Trump has handled this in the way that the American foreign policy establishment has wanted him to, which is to speak up about it, but not to do too much, and also to talk to the Chinese behind the scenes, which I'm sure has occurred. Trump, I thought the president made really good comments at his UN General Assembly speech in September. He's talked about it in August. He's also spoke about it in October. I think we're going to hear more from the president on this, largely because this is something that's becoming unavoidable as we're seeing more and more scenes of what's happening. And I think that, as I said, as I hope, more people will see this as our fight as well. So I do see more Reagan-esque comments coming from President Trump, especially as time progresses.
Have you seen a change? I mean, you're somebody that operates in the same echelon as a lot of the folks who are experts on China that go on TV, and I mean, you know those folks, you know what they write. Have you seen a change in sentiment among the Chinese foreign policy, U.S. Chinese foreign policy intelligentsia, specifically about the trade war? Because, I mean, I remember in the early days of this, it was going to be fire and brimstone, and it was crazy. And now we just don't hear a lot about it. Gordon, why aren't we hearing so much about the trade war?
Well, I think that President Trump has won many of the arguments on the trade war. When what we call a trade war, I should say, because this is really a broader economic war, and indeed it's even a more comprehensive struggle than that. But put that aside for the moment. People were saying, in 2018, oh, China's got all the upper hand, it's got all the cards, It's got more political will. And people, as they've started to look at the relationship between China and the United States, have seen that, no, when you look at objective factors, the U.S. has almost all the high cards. And as a question of political will, that's still up in the air because you have President Trump, who has actually, I think, played the Chinese very well right now. He's taken a strong hand, and he has pushed the Chinese in ways that they probably thought were not possible. So I think that's good. In terms of the way China watchers look at this, it's become inescapable how bad China has behaved. And so we're starting to see, I think, a new consensus. And if you want to think about any one example in the last week, it's that New York Times revelation of 403 pages of Communist Party documents on the treatment of the Uyghurs and Kazakhs in the northwestern part of China, what China calls Xinjiang and what the local inhabitants call Chinese-occupied East Turkestan.
Gordon Chang, everybody. Gordon, thanks so much for making the time. We appreciate your expertise.
Thank you so much, Buck.
We got an update for you on the Epstein situation. I don't even know. It's not really an investigation. It's a lot of things all tied together. You have the two guards who apparently fell asleep in the Manhattan Correctional Facility here in New York City. And then Epstein killed himself while they were asleep, and they altered the logs somehow to cover up what had happened. We're supposed to believe it's all a coincidence. We're being told that they fell asleep. It was an accident. If there was one time in the careers of these two guards not to fall asleep, it was this time, and they fell asleep. It strikes me as a little coincidental that this happened with this particular prisoner who might have had, and now we'll never really know, information in his head about pedophilia and some of the most powerful people, wealthy people, influential people in the world. It's just very coincidental. And I really liked, I saw a clip from Tucker Carlson's show recently. It was an old clip where he points out that when you upset the state, the big S state, if you're Roger Stone, they send SWAT teams in your house to humiliate you, and they tip off CNN. Remember that when CNN was like, we just got lucky. What a bunch of liars. The place is such a disgrace. It's disgusting. But they humiliated Roger Stone. They sent armed people. They could have just called and said, turn yourself in tomorrow. You're under arrest. 100% chance that Roger Stone would have said, all right, I'll be in court tomorrow, or I'll be in the station house or whatever it is tomorrow. But no, they sent people in at 6 a.m. with guns and more guns to terrify him and create a spectacle. But Epstein was allowed to turn himself in. Epstein, the first time around, was given the most pampered treatment of anybody you've ever heard of in prison. And he was trafficking in, I believe, over 34 victims have been identified. Young girls. How can anyone look at that part of our system and not say there's really something wrong here? Why are we supposed to always be, we're supposed to be quiet and believe the system is good and fair and there's no, only by the way, when the system is crushing Republicans all the time, then the system is great. But we see what goes on here with Epstein. And we're told, well, no, you have to believe it. You have to think that they knew what they were doing here somehow. And if you ask too many questions about who in power influenced this whole process, then you're a conspiracy theorist. No, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case at all. I'm still wondering when there'll be more information, more evidence out there about Epstein. By the way, the British royal, is it Prince Andrew, right? That's the one, the second son of Queen Elizabeth. His PR director or whatever the guy's title was, resigned. before the BBC interview. So clearly he knew that this was not going to go well. And yet he did that interview anyway. And then it's still pretty stunning to me that there's not more curiosity among journalists with so many of these pieces out there. And I'm telling you, it's because they know there's a sense that they know that digging too deep with the Epstein thing could lead to places that a lot of lib journos just don't want to go. Forget about all the underage victims for the lib journos. That's not worth the risk here if it could really damage one political party a whole lot.